This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news, recorded at 13:30 GMT on Friday, the 21st of October. I'm Oliver Conway with a selection of highlights from across the BBC World Service. Coming up, fighters from so-called Islamic State have carried out a series of attacks in the Iraqi city of Kirkuk. South Africa says it's withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. Former Judge Richard Goldstone is unhappy with the decision.
It's a very sad day for me. This purported withdrawal now by the South African executive is both unlawful and unconstitutional.
As many as 3.2 million debit cards in India are at risk after a massive data breach. And
this is my first modelling event. I've never worn heels for hours before. So I've learned a lot. I've learned to be patient.
Kenya's first Mr. and Miss Albino beauty pageant. More on that later. First, though, fighters from the so-called Islamic State group may be under pressure in Iraq's second city, Mosul, but they've hit back in Kirkuk, about 170 kilometres to the southeast. At least 6 police officers and 16 civilians were killed in a series of attacks. 12 members of IS also died in Kirkuk. Valerie Sarnason got an update from the BBC's Richard Galpin, who's in the city of Erbil, about halfway between Mosul and Kirkuk.
Well, we certainly know that the fighting continued throughout the morning. Clashes, obviously, between the militants and the security forces. The security forces included elite units from the counter-terrorism forces who rushed to the area once this attack got underway. It certainly caught the security forces by surprise. We know that quite a lot of people have been killed. Certainly some reports saying around about 20. These figures have yet to be confirmed. And it seems to be in a kind of marauding style attack by Islamic State fighters. Their goal, certainly in Kirkuk itself, was to get inside key buildings, government buildings. They've also been using suicide bombers, car bombs. And it seems there was a separate group, as far as we can work it out, which attacked to the west of the city and to the north, where they targeted a power station where we know there have been quite a lot of casualties. Some reports saying 5 Iranian nationals who are working for a company at the power station there, and around about 8 Iraqi workers killed in the attacks there, which again included suicide bombers. So it's been a pretty significant assault on Kirkuk and some of the areas around it.
And what about near where you are, the ongoing military operation to retake Mosul from IS?
Yes, it has been continuing as expected. We've seen action actually from where we are, with a big barrage of surface-to-surface missiles being fired from this command centre, presumably towards the front lines or to specific targets inside Mosul city itself. It's not clear exactly where they were aimed. And meanwhile, yes, they've been pushing ahead from the Iraqi army from this position here. They're trying to push further and further north towards Mosul city, and also around the eastern front as well, where the Kurdish fighters, the Peshmerga, and Iraqi special forces are involved in a number of battles. We believe that the town of Batala has fallen to the Iraqi special forces, although there's some questioning about that, whether it's fully in their hands or whether fighting is still continuing. But that actually lies just 6 miles or 10 kilometres from the eastern side of Mosul city, so they are getting quite close.
Richard Galpin in northern Iraq. South Africa has told the United Nations it's withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. In a letter to the ICC, the South African government said efforts to resolve conflicts were sometimes incompatible with the interpretations of the court. Several countries have accused the ICC of only targeting African leaders. Richard Goldstone, a former South African judge and a former chief prosecutor for the UN tribunals on the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, said South Africa's withdrawal would not be legally binding.
It's a very sad day for me. South Africa has played a crucial and leading role in setting up the International Criminal Court, the ICC. In 2002, South Africa not only ratified the statute, but in addition, the South African Parliament passed enabling legislation, in effect making their own statute part of South African law. It's certainly my opinion that this purported withdrawal now by the South African executive is both unlawful and unconstitutional.
Dennis Bloom from one of the opposition parties in South Africa, Congress of the People, said Jacob Zuma's government didn't want to be held to account for its behaviour.
They are running away from scrutiny. They don't want to be accountable to the people of the country and to the rest of the world. That is our serious concern that we are having. We don't want to have a dictatorship in our country like somewhere in Africa. That's why we disagree with that.
Valerie Sanderson asked our correspondent Karen Allen in Johannesburg to explain South Africa's rationale for leaving the ICC.
It finds the obligations of the International Criminal Court to arrest indicted war criminals, people who have been accused of war crimes by the ICC. It feels there is a conflict of interest between that and customary law, which says that diplomatic immunity can be exercised by leaders. Now, the backstory to this is in 2015, last year, Omar al-Bashir, the Sudanese leader who is wanted for alleged war crimes in Darfur, he visited South Africa as part of a regional summit. South Africa was under pressure to arrest him. They did not. A legal challenge followed, and it was found to have been in breach of its responsibilities to the International Criminal Court. So the South African government's move today, it says, we can't continue in this situation. We want to pull out from the International Criminal Court because, to be honest, if we were to arrest people like Omar al-Bashir, that would be seen as meddling in another country's affairs. I think the significance of this is it still needs to go to Parliament. As we know, the ANC government has got a majority in Parliament, quite a substantial majority still. It is African National Congress party policy to withdraw from the ICC. So I think it would be highly likely that if South Africa is committed to going in this path, it will eventually withdraw.
Is there any opposition to it?
Yes, there is opposition. There's opposition politically and also on the streets of South Africa. It's a very, very divided issue. You know, there are many people who feel concerned that South Africa has got this role, historically, a very proud role as a defender of social justice. And if South Africa is not blazing the trail to try and bring alleged war criminals to book, who else will in this part of the world? But by the same note, there are many people, not only in South Africa, but right across the continent, that are really concerned about selective justice, as they would see it being exercised by the International Criminal Court. All the cases so far that have concluded have involved African leaders. There is an argument for that the International Criminal Court would say that it's because that is where they only have jurisdiction in countries where there is not the possibility of trying those perpetrators locally, but by the same note, there's also concern that countries like the United States are not subject to the ICC's justice. And for many people, that makes it a white man's law.
Karen Allen in Johannesburg. Well, South Africa's decision to withdraw from the ICC comes just 2 weeks after Burundi announced its own plans to remove itself from the court's jurisdiction. Anna Holligan reports for the BBC from The Hague, where the court is based. We asked her to explain what's behind all this.
When the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta was charged with crimes against humanity, the African Union argued that heads of state should be entitled to immunity for the duration of their term in office. A direct contravention of the ICC's whole reason for being, to hold the most powerful to account. The trial against Mr. Kenyatta later collapsed due to a lack of evidence. There were almost farcical scenes when the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir attended a summit in Johannesburg at the invitation of the African Union, then disappeared during dinner after resounding calls from human rights groups for South Africa to uphold its obligation as a member of the ICC to detain him in line with the outstanding arrest warrant. It seems this divided loyalty between the competing demands of the African Union and the ICC has driven South Africa to initiate the process of pulling out. 9 out of 10 of the ICC's current investigations are in Africa, leading to allegations of bias against African countries. The ICC says it's driven by the evidence and is simply fulfilling its role of bringing justice to victims of mass atrocities when countries are unwilling or unable to do so themselves.
And that was Anna Holligan reporting from The Hague. The first ever Mr. and Miss Albino pageant is about to get underway in Kenya. The contest hopes to highlight the condition where people have little or no pigment in their skin. Organisers hope to change perceptions. Our reporter Deo Yusuf went to meet some of the contestants.
Step by step, these first-time models are being taught how to walk the catwalk.
Don't focus anywhere else. Just focus right there, okay? And I want you to take 5 steps.
The girls are unsteady and wobbling in their 5-inch heels. These girls and boys have albinism, an inherited condition at birth characterized by a lack of pigment that normally gives color to the skin, hair and the eyes. Not used to the spotlight, they have for a long time lived in the shadows, fearing for their lives. For many years, they have been targeted for ritual sacrifices and mutilations, forcing some of them to even run away from their homes to safety. Jairus Ongeta remembers the hard times growing up with albinism.
Growing up, it was a bit of hard because like the people there in the rural areas, like most of them had not seen people with albinism. They never understood like how does like an African get a white kid or something. So it was tricky, like maybe playing with other kids and stuff, relating.
Walk, 1, 2, 3.
But now, Jairus will grace the catwalk with other albinos competing for the first time in Africa for the title of Mr. and Miss Albinism Kenya. They have had to learn not only to dress, but also to carry themselves in public. Maurice Nyaga is a professional model and a trainer, and he has taken up the challenge to get them ready before they face the judges.
Here we are focused with the catwalk, and we are also doing grooming. We are also doing etiquette and personal attributes. That is how to face people, how to talk to people, how you're in town, you're meeting with people, how you mingle with them, and then when you're in town, how you're supposed to walk. I'm not supposed to walk just like anybody. I'm supposed to walk like a model. Anytime, every time. Give me the delay. Don't move your head too fast. Don't be tensed. Have confidence. Okay?
I've been watching them in rehearsal for about 2 hours now, and even I can see some improvements in balancing on the high-heel shoes and walking in straight lines. The smiles on their faces as they improve bit by bit seems to give them strength to push further. A female contender, Sarah Jones, is happy with what she has achieved so far.
First of all, this is my first modeling event. I've never worn heels for like hours before, so I've learned a lot. I've learned to be patient because wearing heels is not something small from being a person who wears very low shoes.
But others like Jairus have their eyes set on the top prize.
If I win, which I want to, it's gonna be awesome. I want to represent these people. I want to like be an ambassador of Albinism Society of Kenya.
All the models tell stories of being traumatized so much that their self-esteem has been dented. Their trainer, Maurice, says that is where the hard work lies.
They need an extra training. It's because, before they used to believe that, I can never be a model because I'm an albino. But we want to change that idea. So they're confident we're still working on it. Don't look candle, just focus around me. Okay?
This event may be about who comes out top in the glamour stakes, but the longer-term hope is that modeling here will give these teenagers with albinism the confidence to go out into the wider world, be visible and proud of who they are and what they can achieve.
That report from Kenya by Deo Yusuf. Tens of thousands of people across Latin America have taken part in protests against gender violence over the past week following the rape and murder of 16-year-old Lucia Perez in Argentina. Protesters marched against machismo, the Spanish word for an exaggerated form of masculinity. The demonstrators say that in its extreme form, machismo leads to violence against women. The murdered teenager's mother recently spoke to the BBC, and Ben James asked Arturo Wallace from BBC Mundo what she said.
She's, of course, still very sad and concerned about these sort of things. It was a very moving interview, actually, and she was very thankful with the response that the case of her daughter produced. It's not only Argentina who's been talking about violence against women, these sort of things. It's been the whole of Latin America. A lot of women took to the streets on Wednesday in many different countries, in Chile, in Uruguay, in El Salvador, in Mexico, all over the continent, under the slogan of no one less, no one woman less. using the case of Lucia as a reminder that this sort of situation is unacceptable. But she was also concerned about other underlying problems other than violence against women. She was actually relating the murder of her daughter, with an increasing problem with drug trafficking in Mar del Plata when this happened.
And this reminds me as well of a story that we covered in Brazil too, bringing lots of people out onto the streets and using an awful case like this one to concentrate people's minds on violence against women, but also the perception that the culture in Brazil at that time contributes to that. Is that what people in Argentina are also saying? Some kind of machismo culture that contributes to violence against women?
Absolutely. And sadly, I mean, what happened with this little girl, Lucia Perez, as you said, it's not unheard of. We had this horrible case in Brazil a few months ago. I mean, in Colombia, I remember reporting on a case like that when I was a correspondent as well. So, yeah, of course, there is an underlying thing of machismo. Actually, it's quite sad. One of the things that the mother of Lucia told us was the very same day that this big demonstration was taking place in Mar del Plata and through Latin America, another woman was raped by 3 different men in the same city in the same day. So it is an ongoing problem, and of course this idea that women cannot decide for themselves and over their bodies, it is a problem. Of course, not only in Latin America, it also happens in other parts of the world, but certainly the machista culture of Latin America is part of the problem.
Arturo Wallace from BBC Mundo. This is Global News, the best stories, interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. If you miss any of the week's events, you can catch up with The World This Week, and Ben Wright is here to tell us what's in the latest edition.
On The World This Week, as Iraqi forces and other fighters advance on the Islamic State stronghold of Mosul, we ask how the military campaign is likely to go and what will happen to the city's population. In the week, a dual Iranian-American citizen and his father were sentenced to 10 years in prison in Tehran. Why does Iran's judiciary appear to be getting tough on people with business links to the US? And with Donald Trump claiming the US election is fixed, we ask if there's any way of rigging a presidential election. That's The World This Week with me, Ben Wright.
And you can hear that on the World Service on Saturdays and Sundays, or download it from our website. Now back to the Global News podcast, and Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May has told fellow leaders at a European Union summit in Brussels that the UK expects to play a full part in EU decision-making right up until the moment it leaves the bloc, expected to be in 2019. One of the key unanswered questions is what will happen to EU workers who've moved to the UK under free movement rules. Polish people make up a sizable part of the migrant community here, and our Europe correspondent Kevin Connolly has been to Poland to hear the view from there.
There are moments, like when you're swept up in the sounds of Mass, when Polish life seems ageless and changeless and timeless. But this is a country that's transformed itself as it's exorcised the demons of Soviet communism over the last 30 years. For most Poles, EU membership means not just better roads and better infrastructure, but a guarantee of a democratic future. And of course, up till now, freedom of movement in countries like the UK.
So many of us live in the UK and they're just worried whether they will be forced to come back and what their future might look like.
The writer and journalist Julia Szyńdzierloś says Brexit voters may not understand that to people once effectively, collectively imprisoned under communism, freedom of movement isn't just about efficient labour markets. It's about freedom itself.
I myself remember after we joined, and for the first time at an airport, I could join the EU citizens aisle and just go without much control, without a stamp, and cross the border. I had tears in my eyes because that was such a touching moment, and to be deprived of that will be very, very hurtful.
Modern Poland is sharply polarised between a deeply conservative government and a range of liberal opposition parties. But one thing they agree on is the argument you hear increasingly in Europe that Britain can't expect access to the single market unless it accepts EU migration. It's not just about Britain, says Poland's former Europe Minister Rafał Trzaskowski. It's about making sure that Brexit doesn't lead to a wider unravelling of the whole EU project.
Just trying to unpick the freedoms and saying, OK, I like financial freedom of movement, but I don't like free movement of workers. I mean, that would actually allow other states to do exactly the same. A lot of states in the European Union are not so happy with the free movement of services, so they would unpick that. Some people would say, I'm fine with free movement of goods, but maybe wine, not too good because my wine is not competitive. Then the whole edifice will crumble. Because, as I've said, you can have opt-outs from common foreign security policy or immigration, but if you touch at the backbone, then I think the whole construction will fall apart.
There was a time when you ate vegetarian in Poland because they'd run out of meat. But things are different now. At the Secret Life Cafe in Żoliborz, falafel and tofu are among the dishes of the day. Among the customers is Julia Libera, who came home from London to Warsaw with her husband after the referendum. She hadn't known the views of her Brexit-supporting friends and colleagues. Now, she says, she doesn't know if she'll be welcomed back in the future.
They were so nice, so friendly. They really loved us. And just before the Brexit, before the referendum, they told us they would vote to leave the EU. And we were shocked. Why? Really? Every single one told me, you're not the problem. All the others are the problem. So it was really uncomfortable. And it was the first time in my life that I felt doing everything right, you're still not seen as a good citizen.
Do you honestly believe that it will be impossible for you to go back and work in Britain again one day in the future?
Yes, I think it is possible that I won't be allowed to work in UK, and that makes me sad and angry.
Winter is already on the edge of the wind that carries the bells of evening prayer across Warsaw. Useful preparation for what Poland's politicians expect to be a chilly atmosphere around the Brexit negotiating table. Freedom of movement really matters in the former communist states of the EU, and there's a feeling that Brexit is a big moment, not just in the UK, but here too.
Kevin Connolly reporting from Poland. American football is a sport known for its physicality and tough tackling. Players wear heavy padding to protect themselves, but one trainer is causing a stir on social media. Tom Herman is head coach of the University of Houston's Cougars team, and he kisses each player on the cheek before every game. So how's he handling the media attention?
I'm a bit surprised, to be honest with you, because it seems very natural for me. And the reason is because when I recruit these young men, I tell them, I'm going to treat you like I treat my sons, which is with a tremendous amount of love, oftentimes tough love, but you're going to get all of my love. You're going to get a bunch of support. I kiss my own sons. I got a 9-year-old and a 3-year-old at home, and I kiss them on the cheek quite frequently. And if I'm going to be true to my word and truly treat these young men, our players, like my sons, then, if it were my son and he were getting ready to go, put on some shoulder pads and throw his body into harm's way, I'd give him a big kiss on the cheek and a big bear hug, and I'd tell him how much I love him and how much, I'm looking forward to watching him play. I think we as a society in the States have tried to suppress male affection. Many of my players, over half of them, said that it was literally the first time they'd ever been kissed by a man. A lot of them didn't grow up with fathers. That to me seemed a bit sad, and I don't ever want that to leave, I guess, our society where, that it becomes cool to not show affection and emotion by men, because I think it's very natural when you truly love someone like a son or like a father, if you will, then a big hug and a kiss is the simplest of ways to show them that you do. The best I can remember, I think they were probably all a bit shocked and maybe taken aback is the right word, but nobody openly protested or objected. I think, once they realized where it came from and the reason behind it, then, I've had, guys tell me they look forward to it.
Tom Herman, head coach of the University of Houston's Cougars football team. Some of India's leading banks are telling customers to replace their debit cards or change their security codes after fears of a security breach. As many as 3.2 million debit cards may have been compromised in one of the biggest ever data breaches in India. Here's our Delhi correspondent Sanjoy Majumdar.
Some of India's top private and state-run banks began receiving complaints last month that their clients' debit cards had been fraudulently used abroad, mainly in China and the United States, even though their holders were in India. 3/4 of the affected debit cards are on the Visa, MasterCard and the local RuPay platforms, although all three companies say their own networks had not been compromised. Investigators believe that a malware in one of the ATM networks may have been used to access credit card data. Regulators say the banks have taken immediate measures and there is little cause for panic, especially as the amount lost by customers is said to be less than $200,000. But it is bound to affect customer confidence in a country that is largely a cash economy, with most people suspicious of electronic cashless transactions.
Sanjoy Majumdar. With 2.5 weeks to go until the US presidential election, commentators and pollsters are keeping a close eye on the voting intentions of America's diverse communities and demographics. Today we look at what young voters are thinking. Jane O'Brien has been assessing the mood in the state of North Carolina.
Climate change experts agree on the fact there is climate change.
Yes.
There is no general consensus that human
A chance encounter between a young Trump supporter and a group of environmental activists prompts an energetic exchange at North Carolina State University.
It just doesn't exist.
But unlike the increasingly ugly national debate, this discussion is remarkable for its civility. Millennials say they're sick of the tone and the personality-driven politics of the presidential campaign. Young Trump supporters in particular say the allegations of sexual misconduct are beside the point.
I've just desensitized myself to this kind of the sleaze and all that kind of stuff. I mean, every day there's something new about each candidate. But I'm not going to throw away my vote just because of that, because we have more important issues to get to.
While I might not agree with everything, I know what he says and I know what he thinks. On the other side, I have Hillary Clinton, who I really don't know who she is as a character and who she is as a person.
How, though, do you balance that authenticity, that honesty, with the things that he actually says, which are pretty awful?
I think his comments actually trump the fact that, Hillary's a liar, and he really says what he believes.
The vision of Donald Trump, his plans for our country and over the next decade will radically change our course, I think, for American history. And those issues are much more important than some of the questionable and unacceptable things that he has said.
An estimated 69.2 million millennials are eligible to vote this year, making the 18 to 35-year-olds a potentially decisive force. But they're also much less likely to vote than any other age group, particularly in this election. Andrew Taylor is Professor of Political Science at NC State.
One of the things that I've noticed in this election is that kind of sense that they don't have options, that they're not very excited about these choices, and a real way of looking at politics in a negative light, in a cynical light. And that's the kind of behaviour you really only expect to see in more seasoned voters.
The official last day to register to vote is tomorrow by 5 p.m. That's when your registration form needs to be at the Wake County Board of Elections.
19-year-old Tamara Conway is heading the Pack the Polls initiative on campus, encouraging students to register.
There's a pessimistic attitude with this election. I think I can say both for Hillary and Trump. There's a bit of fear. A lot of people think it's the lesser of two evils.
You were a Bernie supporter. How difficult was it for you to make the leap from Bernie to Clinton?
It wasn't that difficult because Bernie had a lot of great ideas, but not a lot of concrete plans. So for them, when Bernie decided to drop his campaign and he then worked with Hillary on her policies, it's the best of both worlds, I think, now.
It is my honor to introduce to you the governor of the state of Indiana and the next vice president of the United States, Governor Mike Pence.
Well over half of voters in North Carolina are expected to vote early, which means this battleground state could be won or lost well before polling day. That's why heavy hitters from both parties are keeping up the pressure with personal appearances. Clinton has edged ahead in the state, which Barack Obama won in 2008, buoyed by a wave of young voters. But interest in this election has waned significantly, and the polls show that many millennials are too disillusioned to bother with any candidate.
Jane O'Brien in North Carolina. And that is almost it from the Global News podcast for now. But if you have a few minutes to spare, do stay with us for news from elsewhere, a roundup of stories from around the world you might not have heard. It's put together by Cassie Cavallaro from BBC Monitoring. And Cassie, to start with, you have a Halloween story from Japan.
Yes, well, Japanese doll makers are unhappy about a theme park using hundreds of traditional dolls in a spooky Halloween attraction. The Japanese Doll Association has written to Universal Studios Japan, which is in Osaka, saying its haunted house makes the dolls seem cursed or scary and will damage the business of manufacturers and retailers. The letter says the dolls are works of art and the attraction gives a negative impression of them to the general public and also destroys traditional culture. The attraction itself is called Tatari, Curse of the Living Dolls, and is advertised as suitable only for those over 12. Anyone who dares to venture inside will find a decaying shrine where dolls filled with malice reside. A promotional poster shows one of the dolls with blood running from its eyes.
Yeah, perhaps not portraying them in the best light. You said they were traditional dolls, works of art. Where are they from?
Well, the Doll Association is particularly unhappy because they're on loan from a shrine in Wakayama, which has a huge collection donated by people from across the country. Apparently, the shrine itself already attracts some visitors who are interested in the supernatural. The theme park has rejected the Doll Association's protest, saying it has no legal basis, and the attraction will therefore remain open as planned until the 6th of November. But it said it would take on board the valuable feedback.
Well, on to the next one. And a church leader in Ukraine has had more than just feedback after getting himself into a spot of bother.
Yes, this is a Ukrainian archbishop who's been sent to a monastery for a month after being caught on CCTV taking part in a bar brawl. Police armed with Kalashnikovs were called to break up the melee, which involved the Archbishop of Ternopil and Podillia, who's called Archbishop Mstislav, some of his clergymen and other patrons. The men are members of the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church, the smallest of Ukraine's 3 Orthodox churches. It says that the church itself says the Archbishop is being sent away for repentance, and the others have been suspended.
And presumably also questions from the church about what they were doing in the bar in the first place.
That's right. Before the fisticuffs, the CCTV footage shows them all happily dancing with various women. That didn't please church leaders, as their outing took place during a period of fasting to mark an Orthodox holy day, during which any festivities are banned. Archbishop Mstislav initially denied being involved, apparently unaware of the CCTV footage, but the head of the church, Metropolitan Makary, appears to have admitted it on his behalf by apologising to all Ukrainian believers for the clergyman's actions.
OK, let's move on from bars to birds and DIY efforts to save one of New Zealand's most iconic species.
Yes, a kiwi chick has been saved in New Zealand thanks to the imaginative use of masking tape. The chick's badly damaged shell was found by a Department of Conservation worker and taken to the Rainbow Springs Nature Park in Rotorua. It was placed in the care of Kiwi husbandry manager Claire Travers, who used nothing but sticky tape and a fragment of shell to patch up the hole. It was touch and go as to whether the chick would survive, as the shell had broken through to the egg's internal membrane, which had collapsed on top of the chick.
Touch and go, but I'm hoping there was a happy ending.
Yes, there was. The masking tape fix worked and the bird hatched 11 days later. It's been named Fisher after its cracked egg.
Yeah, clever. But also important because kiwis are under threat.
That's right. Kiwis are a national icon, but the Department of Conservation says all 5 species of the bird are at risk of extinction. There are only 68,000 left in the country. Stoats are the main threat to chicks. They're responsible for about half of kiwi chick deaths on the mainland. The government set aside millions of dollars last year to help conservation efforts, although they probably didn't have masking tape in mind as a conservation tool.
Cassie Cavallaro, thanks for joining us from BBC Monitoring. And that is all from us for now. An updated version of the Global News podcast will be available to download later. I'm Oliver Conway. Until next time, goodbye.